We sure did, and as soon as I said we must start in Europe, actually, the big news in rugby at the moment is Scott Robertson
Yeah.
has been relieved of his duties in the other side of the world for New Zealand. We looked there just before we came on the chat. 10 wins out of 13 last year in the test matches. Has been in the job a year before that. This is 20 months out for a World Cup. There was chat he had fallen out, or the senior players didn't really get on with him. There was a bit of animosity, and that's the way they've gone. The New Zealand board have decided they need a new coach. Are you shocked? Are you not shocked? What do you do you think it's too soon before a World Cup, or is it the fact that they need to make a
Well,
change
there's
on it?
obviously a problem, and you're better off to address it, and the power brokers and decision makers have done that. I don't know Scott Robertson personally, but we all had seen the success with the Crusaders before he took over the job, and there was great excitement about his strategy coming in after Ian Foster. He was under a fair bit of pressure, Ian Foster, and I think he had some difficult moments towards the end of his tenure as the All Blacks coach. They don't usually sack coaches. It's kind of unheard of, really. Um, of course there's shock to this. Yeah, there is shock, and we'll probably hear more about that. I think the initial shock was again you never really hear those kind of stories coming out of New Zealand rugby as regards player unrest or players not being happy. And from that review that they conducted probably post November, looking back at the whole year, some of that stuff started to drip feed out. That always kind of happens, even though they're confidential kind of documents and surveys, player surveys and stuff like that. And so I think I was kind of shocked when I heard some of that some senior players weren't happy and the structures, the way they were playing. And ultimately, New Zealand haven't had the same dominance in the last couple of years. So, you go back to 22 when Ireland won the series there. Very up and down results, and they became a side that other teams fancied their chances against, and so I think they came back into the pack in the history of the professional game, and even before they've always been the kind of standard bearers and trendsetters and team that everybody else would look up to. It's like a religion, rugby in New Zealand, and I think they certainly came back into the pack. South Africa, New Zealand, and of course, there's been times over the years that Australia have had wonderful teams as well. England had that World Cup in '03. They were the dominant force in World Rugby. They won a series that year in New Zealand. It was a famous kind of series win as well. So they've certainly gone back a bit, and they've. I think the biggest shocking result and probably the most disappointing result that lingered was that game in Wellington against South Africa, where South Africa just blew them away. I can't remember the exact score. Was it 43-10 or
Yeah,
something like
record,
that?
wasn't it?
It was a record loss, and so that obviously lingered, and that obviously was something that was hard to take for New Zealand fans and the New Zealand Rugby Union. And I suppose there was a hope that they could go and win the kind of Grand Slam tour at the end of the year and maybe show improvement. But I think even that game in Twickenham, that second half, they were dominated by England, a very good England side. So yeah, it's probably lingering for a while, and there's you never know. It's difficult being a head coach. He seems like a very popular guy and
He certainly was at the Crusaders.
energetic
Remember,
guy and
dancing
gets
and
on well with
everything.
people, but pressure does strange things to coaches, and it cranks up the heat in them. Their temperaments can change, the whole narrative can change within the group, and maybe he was harder or changed his approach somewhat. Leon McDonald, Jason Holland, two assistant coaches, stepping down. Were they stepped down or were they kind of told, move on? I don't exactly know. So that stuff again creates a little bit of uncertainty within the group. But and I only know from chatting to Rog, who would be very close and worked with him at the Crusaders. They have a great relationship. They're very close. and he has great time for his coaching strategies and what he did at the Crusaders. But pressure brings different kind of emotions as well. So the reality here is, and sometimes it's like what any team that's not as good as they previously were, is the players aren't as good. So you then have to have excellent coaching, and it's not a case of it's maybe from what we're used to seeing. Like Ireland have had good success against them in recent years. They just in the last 2-3 years, you've seen teams really cause them problems, and they've had some tough losses. Their win percentage has gone back a little bit. So that's what it is. It's still on their day. They're an outstanding team. They've world class, some world class players, but some that are not. And I suppose you go back to 23. In me saying all that, and I hope people get my point, they nearly won a World Cup, and they possibly should have and could have with 14 men in that final. They got over Ireland that quarter final, and then very easy win against Argentina, and they on their day you'd never doubt them to find a performance or find quality because they have so many X factor players, and they'll always have incredible talent coming through. But I just think the core group hasn't, and it's very hard to compare it to 2011 or 2015, which was
Back to back world champions.
2015 was one of the best squads, not just team that we've ever seen. I know South Africa have probably raised that level up as regards squad depth, but yeah, it's big news, and it's world news now because they attract the attention all the time because they're just an outstanding rugby nation, and it's like a religion, as I said there. I've toured there with Ireland a few times, and I've worked there in commentary a few times, so got to see the country a little bit more. And I was always fascinated by going through little small towns or really small villages throughout New Zealand. Everywhere there's rugby pitches and rugby posts and kids kicking rugby ball everywhere. So it is like a religion. So this is big news because Scott Robertson was kind of seen as someone who could lift that group to the next level and get them back to that consistent dominance.
And look, we must move on already, which is crazy to say that 24 hours after he's been lost his job, but it's such an opportunity for someone else. We could be here all day naming coaches. They normally like a New Zealander at the helm. Joe Schmidt's there.
I don't think they're going to take in anyone overseas.
Okay.
Who knows? They might look at that strategy.
Jimmy Joseph, would Tony Brown go back? Or is he in such a good place in South
Africa?
I don't know. You don't think they'll take anyone?
I don't know.
Outside of New Zealand?
No, I don't think so because they've so much talent as regards
Rog?
Coaches. Not as a head coach. I don't think with respect to Rog. I just think they'll appoint someone who's a New Zealander. As regards to staff and if there's any sort of changes there. Because he brought in a lot of his own staff. As I said, Liam MacDonald stepped away and Jason Holland stepped away, or were pushed. We don't know. And so I don't know. I think Joe Schmidt would obviously be a candidate. It's a worrying kind of trend though as well, and it's look, I think.
As in, are you saying that a wee bit like going towards football territory or not at all?
A little bit. I think, the players have probably got to look at themselves as well. And look, they can only be honest in their appraisals. We did one of them, after the World Cup in 2007 with Ireland, and Eddie O'Sullivan kept his job for a period of time afterwards, but then results went a bit askew again. And I think it was probably, after... I can't remember exactly, but he was there for another period of time. He had an extension on his contract before the World Cup. He might have been there for another year or two, and then there was a change made there. But nothing came out. Like obviously, when we did a review like that, there was certain things that players said about coaches as regards the structures or the approach or the coaching or the time on the field, and you want all that stuff if you're doing a survey and a player survey. But I don't know. I never heard of anything coming out saying, that the coaches should be sacked or whatever that doesn't happen. So, but they've obviously reacted here in a sense that I think my point here is player power. We've got to be careful about that.
And we've obviously heard things about Artie Surveyor recently,
Yeah, and look, when relationships break down and stuff,
and not just him. I presume it is a senior pool.
Yeah, well, you want your bosses kind of backing you if you're the coach, but then if you've a bunch of players who are saying, look, we don't think we're getting the same level of coaching, or the detail isn't good enough, or the atmosphere or the culture or whatever the case may be, I suppose that's where it reacts. And maybe, I think if any coach in World Rugby tries to get a job anywhere now, the first place anyone who was within a club looking for somebody will ask, they'll try and talk to former players. What's he like? What's the character like? Is he good? They'll get, it's usually players that decide these situations, but you think the players were probably the ones that got him in there as well and got that excitement going as well. But look, as I said, coaches can change. I've probably experienced it myself where you think, they're different characters and they're more really relaxed, and then they get the head coach job, and it creates all sort of pressure. So, it's surprising. But look, you have to be careful that, it happens a lot in football, because they're worth so much money in Premier Leagues and different, there's talk of Alonso losing the players in Real Madrid, and, do you get rid of, if there's a problem, couple of players, do you get rid of them and keep the coach? The coach is always going to suffer, particularly at that level when you have players who are on so much money. I'm not saying that happened here, but look, I think he'd be disappointed because, but who knows, maybe we'll hear some more as regards, if it's coaching
probably doesn't
tactics.
help the one as you talking that, because it's interesting. I think before a group of players backed Ian Foster.
Yeah,
publicly.
Yeah, so obviously
and this time it doesn't seem to be like that at all.
And there's been some breakdown, but he seemed like a very popular choice, didn't he? Like that they got their man. This is the guy that's going to take him back to that consistent level of brilliance. So maybe he's not this nice guy that you persona, happy-go-lucky, joyful guy. But every coach needs to have a ruthless streak. I heard that from Munster players. When Rassie was in Limerick with them, and he was great crack and fun and very approachable and stuff. But if you weren't doing your job, or your attitude wasn't right, they saw a different side of him a few times, So you do have to create a little bit of fear within the group, because you've got to manage adults and get results and try and get people on board with the way you want to play, whether it's in any sport. So, when you think of 10 wins out of 13, it's not a bad return. You're beaten by South Africa, who are an outstanding team, and you're beaten by an English team. I think South Africa twice, and then you're beaten by England, who were, look like they're coming back to that top table, and they have a very, very strong, powerful side. And look, even stronger New Zealand sides have lost in Twickenham as well, So, but there's obviously some bit of unhappiness in what's going on, and they've reacted to that.
Well, I suppose that lastly on that as well, just out from a World Cup 20 months, I say, if I asked you who's close to the favourites after South Africa, you'd still put them up there.
Of course, because they'll always have good players. I think, probably, they're always going to bring out extraordinary young players through, because they have that talent. And as I said, it's, their underage level, their school system, their under 20s teams, there's stars always produced there. So look, it wouldn't be a bad job to have if you're a coach and you fancy your chances having a crack at the World Cup 20 months out, given it's in Australia as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Joe Schmidt now, because Joe's finishing up with Australia. I think this summer he was supposed to finish.
How many times is he supposed to finish? Just a lover of the game.
To Les Kiss. So who knows? He was involved with them for the World Cup, and he might be, with it being back at home, but who knows? There's be plenty of candidates, New Zealanders, and but yeah, it's one that's grabbed the attention of everyone, the rugby community throughout the world now because they're such a big team.